Good afternoon, community, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual Conversations with Cara discussion. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Kathleen St. Louis Caliento, and I have the honor and pleasure of serving as President and CEO of Cara Collective. Some of you have been with us on this journey, but for those of you who don't know, Conversations with Cara is our year-long series of discussions that are truly centered around our work and the issues that we face in our mission to eradicate poverty. So thank you so much for joining us today. In honor of Black History Month, we're thrilled to be joined today by a panel of Black leaders from the philanthropic and higher education sectors to discuss the intersection of workforce development and education. For more than 30 years, Cara Collective has made it our mission to prepare job seekers, many of whom have the highest barriers to employment, for gainful and sustainable jobs. But as we know, and as the workforce continues to evolve, so must the ways that we prepare current and future generations of workers. This often starts with our education system, with the increased focus on credentialing, upskilling, practical work experience. The perception that a 4-year degree is the only option for long-term career success may no longer be accurate. But the accessibility to quality education is something that still eludes many of our Black and Brown communities. In fact, just this past December, Illinois Policy shared a shocking statistic. For every 100 students who enter a CPS high school, only 30 will earn a post-secondary degree. Statistics like this are disheartening, and a big reason that the early part of my professional career focused on educational equity. In addition to being the child of Haitian immigrants, my parents instilled the importance of a high quality education. It's the reason that I personally pursued a few terminal degrees myself in higher education. And when I think about some of the access and inequity that my parents didn't have access to and that they didn't have the resources to, it's also a driver for me personally. Education, as I learned and as I know, and as many of us know, is sometimes referred to as the great equalizer, along with healthcare, housing, gainful employment, economic empowerment. Equitable access to these critical resources can and have determined the trajectory of so many lives. So with this context, I'm excited to turn us to our conversation today, where we're going to explore how education and workforce development institutions are working together to build more inclusive pathways to gainful employment. We encourage you, please, this is called Conversations with Cara. So we encourage you to be part of the conversation today by sharing your thoughts, any questions that you might have for the panel in our live chat. We're going to make time at the end for Q&A, and we're going to try to get to as many of your questions as possible. And specifically, if you have a question for a specific panelist, just be sure to indicate that in your questions. So without further ado, I would like to invite our panel to the chat. So please join me in welcoming Michelle Howard, Dr. Eddie Phillips, and Dr. Maurice Swinney. Hello, esteemed panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Happy day after Valentine's, happy Black History Month, all of the things. So what I'd love for you all to do is just introduce yourselves and provide a brief overview of your organization and the work that you do. So we're going to start with Michelle, please.
Good afternoon. So incredibly excited to be here. So thank you so much for creating a platform where this type of discussion can happen. Again, my name is Michelle Howard, and I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Program Officer here at Hope Chicago. It's a new 2-generation program that was started in 2022, led by Dr. Janice Jackson, who's the immediate previous superintendent of Chicago Public Schools. And our focus is really economic mobility, taking 2 generations here in Chicago and helping them rise together. So much of the work that we've done in Chicago Public Schools and truly just, across the city has been targeted to one group or the other. And so we have been fortunate to be in a position where we can really take a traditional age student and one of their parents and give them access to higher education, some workforce opportunities. And so we're just incredibly excited for this unique opportunity for students and families here in Chicago, but more importantly, to be in a position where we can work collectively to transform Chicago.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Such incredible work. Eddie, let's go to you, please.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kathleen and Cara Collective, for putting this important panel discussion together. My name is Dr. Eddie Phillips. I'm the Provost and Senior Vice President at National Louis University. We are a proud minority serving institution, 138 years old this year. We serve approximately 11,000 students annually with locations throughout the Illinois area. Home base is in Chicago. We also have a campus in Tampa, Florida. We serve about across 80 academic programs, 126 majors, really equity center, equity focused institution, and a proud partner with Hope Chicago and working with our Hope Scholars at National Louis. So it's really great to be here with you all. Looking forward to the conversation today.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Eddie. And I'm sure you're vying for some of those Tampa visits during these winter months here in Chicago. Maurice, let's turn it over to you.
Hello, and also thank you for bringing us together, Kathleen and Cara Collective. And it's just so good to see Michelle and Eddie. I don't get to see them very often. So to be in the conversation with them today is great. My name is Maurice Sweeney. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at Chicago Beyond, where we invest in proximate leaders who are building alternative models, responding to the needs of their communities. I'm the former Chief Equity Officer at Chicago Public Schools, so I had a chance to work with Michelle and Eddie over the years. We're involved in sort of tackling these big issues that we're talking about today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And so let's just jump right in. So, you know, this May, as many of you know, marks 70 years since the Supreme Court ruled in the Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka decision that racial segregation in public schools violated the 14th Amendment. And so for many, those early beliefs in Brown's power to eliminate racial inequity in the public schools now reflect the beginning of a decades-long struggle to fulfill the promise. Its complex history also evokes our nation's difficulties in overcoming systemic racism, class discrimination, which we still see today, particularly with the recent Supreme Court ruling around affirmative action and the debate. So I'd love to start by asking the panel, what are some key ways that we continue to see these systemic issues surface in our education and employment systems? And how do these lead to more problematic post-secondary education outcomes for people of color? And Dr. Sweeney, I want to start with you, particularly given your background in CBS.
Yeah, thank you. First, this reminds me of the time when I was a high school principal, and we were trying to really think through what does it take for a young person who has limited resources to be successful in high school, go to college, and graduate. And when you think about that sort of continuum of education and experiences, we recognized that, you know, when you have the right resources and the right people around your life, those opportunities are much more probable. When we think about a system, I think there's sort of like there's this misalignment between youth desire, recognizing young people live in their own world. We as adults do not love, I'm using this one fake example, but like love TikTok as much as young people. Whether, you know, they create things, they do a lot of great work, they see a lot of possibility and opportunity, and they have much more exposure than we had when we were younger. There are societal needs around what does our society need to thrive? What are the types of jobs and opportunities needed to keep us as a functional society? There are limited resources for training, and then there's also educational best practices. So when you sort of put all of those things into one bowl, we realize that this is a really, really complex issue, and we have to do some alignment work, some creating the right through lines, the right pipelines to ensure that young people have the right opportunities sitting in front of them. So I think even though there is misalignment, I think there are a lot of us who are taking on these challenges to figure it out and to make the best possible solutions with young people to get them to where they want to be.
Absolutely. Eddie, what would you add to that?
You know, what's interesting, Kathleen, you referenced the Brown versus Board of Education and a recent affirmative action decision from the Supreme Court kind of banning race-conscious admission. And I'm really concerned about the political and legislative momentum that we're seeing around kind of anti-DEI legislative activity across our country. In fact, over 30 bills have either been proposed or passed different states around the country. And what these things really mean and do for students of color who are looking to access higher education to transform their lives is signals to them that their lived experiences, that what they bring to academic settings isn't valuable, it's not important. And so I'm really concerned about, as we think about what's happening across the broader political landscape, you know, our ability, right, to deliver on our college missions. Every single university has a mission statement that espouses ideals of access and inclusivity and transformative impact. But when you have this kind of, you know, opposing force, right, that kind of works against the missions that we're trying to deliver on, I think it has a really insidious impact, right, on students' ability to see themselves as vibrant, productive members in their academic settings. And so I'm concerned about that one. I say, despite, what we're seeing on the legislative front, institutions have been really innovative and found ways to work, within or outside of, some of those confines, and really put some really great supportive services, wraparound supports, affinity groups, and belonging initiatives in place so that students of color who are typically underserved, underrepresented can see themselves as productive members in their academic communities.
And thank you for that. Yeah, that's really challenging to, and evokes a sense of helplessness when you are trying to fight on the sort of ground level, but you've got these systemic legislative and other political factors that sort of are preventing you from making that progress that you hope to see. Michelle, what would you add to this?
Yeah, the last thing that I would add is really kind of the logistics of how it works. Two things that you said, two words that really stuck out to me was one was promise, right? And this was supposed to help. We're looking at it from a couple of different lenses, but the other word that stood out to me was generations, right? Like, so this is something that we've been seeing for generations, and we've still not quite been able to combat and really position in a way to support. And so one of the things that I think is really crucial and important about, Hope Chicago and really just how we're building kind of this collaborative space is many of our students are first generation. Right. So still in 2024, there's a huge number of students who are first generation who are trying to navigate this space. And having been the scholarship manager of Chicago Public Schools for about 6 years and transitioning over to this role, the difference between what I was able to do in Chicago Public Schools as far as scholarship work and the difference in what Hope Chicago is, which is a promise scholarship, means that there is a greater and longer commitment to really being able to support a student. And I'll admit, when I was in Chicago Public Schools, I used to lead with this idea of the root word of scholarship is scholar. And so you have to make sure that you're a scholar if you want access to this opportunity. And then when we start talking about, equity and equality in a different lens, I had to check my bias with that and recognize, like, well, if students and families want to take advantage of some opportunities, our job and our responsibility is to make that available for them, whether they are a 3.0 or whether they're a 2.3, right? This is really about us making sure that families and students have access to these opportunities. And I know we'll talk about that more. Yep. Those two things really stuck out to me is, making sure that we're really hitting this generational impact. And two, what is the real promise of the work that we're trying to do with families?
No, absolutely. And I want to build on that, Michelle, because to your point of this generational kind of lack of access that we're seeing, that is what we're trying to address here, right? And so that's the sort of common thread in terms of what you all have responded to, is that how do we increase that access to resources and opportunity? There was a 2020 report from the Center of American Progress, which cautioned that most American schools lacked the strategies and resources to expose students to careers and industries, with most students enrolling in high school course pathways that lead to a dead end or ineligible for their desired post-secondary option. So either a dead end job or just no true sort of access beyond. What innovations are we seeing in higher ed to help counter some of this lack of access and some of this lack of ability to really be eligible for a desired post-secondary option? Eddie, let's start with you.
I think at its core, and Michelle touched on this, one of the issues is first taking care of basic needs. We saw during the pandemic and certainly post-pandemic, this kind of amplified need for students to have basic needs met. Things like mental health support, things like food insecurity and homelessness and home insecurity and financial instability. And so I've seen many institutions really step forward and lean into taking care of those basic needs so students can, focus on being a great student and pursuing their academic and professional goals. So I think that's kind of a core piece to, really making sure we resource and support students well so they can thrive academically. In terms of kind of programming and some of the things that I've been seeing, many institutions now are taking a hard look at short-term credentials, and stackable credentials, and really thinking about, full vertical alignment of an academic or professional pathway, right, where students have kind of multiple points of entry and exit, and really aligning that to like some level of wage progression. So if you get a certificate, it gets you in the door, but that's not the end of the story, right? You can continue and take that certificate and get an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. And as you upskill and you up credential, with that should come some level of wage progression and more economic mobility. So many schools are looking at kind of those stackable pathways, as well as looking at, skills, durable skills is kind of this new concept that's been emerging. We would refer to it as soft skills or essential skills. You know, these skills that really kind of transcend or traverse industry, but they're just good life skills and giving students the confidence that they need to really navigate and compete in the marketplace. So those are just a couple things, you know, the stackable credentials, focusing on durable skills that I think are really, you know, on the horizon, and lots of institutions of higher ed are starting to pay closer attention to some of those opportunities.
Absolutely. And those are innovations, and National Louis University is at the forefront of that. So really excited that you mentioned that, and to have you leading that work. Michelle, as you're kind of working with parents and with students, and you're kind of helping them think about their post-secondary options, what innovations are you seeing sort of in that space to help combat kind of this lack of access or lack of post-secondary options?
I think that Hope Chicago is in a unique position because, and we'll talk more about partnership, but because we really understand kind of the groundwork that CPS has put in place over years of development, while also having the luxury of, and I'll say luxury because it is a luxury to be able to work with both public and private schools in our partnerships, National Louis obviously being one of our partners. And so what we've been able to see from some of our private schools is exactly that, you know, that innovation. One of our private institutions has a program called Discover Plus, and it's really about helping students have a semester of really discovering what they think they want, what this institution can potentially expose them to, but then also showing them kind of these dual degrees. What is a business engineering degree, right? What is I'm gonna have to look at them because I've never seen some of these, right? But they're innovative, right? So what's a BS in economics and business analytics? What is an economics and cybersecurity major, right? So it's really drilling down and taking some of the innovations that some of these institutions can do fairly quickly than others, and really helping to show not just how that impacts a student's decision and a student's exposure around that, but then also really just highlighting for parents and students what some of these industries mean, right? Yeah. So when we see new majors popping up at these institutions, we know that means that those jobs are coming. Yeah. So really being able to inform families around, you know, when we were talking about our partnerships, we were looking at the strategic plans of the institution. So it wasn't like we just went out and picked any old schools. Illinois is a great state to go to school, and it is a great state that is really pushing this workforce opportunity. And so again, we are in a unique environment here at Hope Chicago to really be able to marry that and really put it in front of families in a way that educates them prior to them actually making some of these decisions.
Absolutely. And you know, the work that even you're doing at Hope Chicago kind of is really because of some of the things that Ed Week actually pointed out, that our education system actually relies on two assumptions, right? First, that college prep curriculum adequately prepares high school graduates for direct entry into the workforce. And second, that college degree is going to guarantee a good job. But students, workers, employers are telling us quite clearly that something is awry. Many employers are claiming that they're unable to find enough skilled workers, while recent graduates don't always feel prepared or qualified to take on even entry-level work, while there's also swimming in debt. So we recognize that there's always going to be a role for higher ed, advanced degrees. So while this shift in perception and reality continues to evolve, how does the role of more traditional four-year degree programs in higher ed need to evolve as well? And, you know, Michelle, I'll start with you. Again, just kind of keep on this, but like, how do you think that the role of more traditional institutions need to evolve to address this?
I think that that's a great point. I think we're all in a position of, you know, evolution. And we have 29 partners at Hope Chicago, and I think that yells a huge flag that institutions know that they have to do something differently, but they know that they can't do it on their own. And I think that that's been very crucial for our partnerships at Hope Chicago. We spend a lot of time exposing students to the institution, but really helping them understand, what does curriculum really mean, right? How does this English class in high school translate to college? And one thing that I can say is that I believe that Chicago Public Schools does an incredible job with really trying to build that pathway support and trying to make that summer melt and summer transition very real for our students. But the reality is, they can't do a thing on a college campus, right? And so what Hope Chicago has been able to do is to really, again, marry this relationship with, you are a higher ed institution. What is it that you're actually looking for? We're not trying to give you a profile of a student. We're trying to help a student understand what your profile is so that they can make the best decision on, this is the good environment for me. These are the right type of people for me. You know, these are the people who will understand what I need. The way that I described it with the partnership that we wanted was that we wanted families to be able to come into these institutions, but to meet a person, and that person basically say to them, this is what nutrition, here's a plate, and this is what nutrition looks like on this campus. And we're going to hand you a fork, and we're going to help you understand how to eat through each of these components, right? And this is the way I really did describe it. But I did it that way because I wanted to be able to assure our parents and our students that we weren't just putting a list of schools together and saying, hey, go to these schools. But we were actually trying to craft something that would help a student make a better choice for themselves. Yeah. And taking away the financial component is not taking away the only barrier. It's taking away a big barrier, yes. Right? But there's so many other barriers that students have when they're navigating on some of these campuses. And when we know that they're going to places that don't have a lot of people that look like them, that means that we have to tap into the things that they know, that they care about. Dr. Sweeney said that earlier. We have to understand who our students are and what these institutions have to help them build their character. Degrees are not it, right? That's ultimately what we're saying. You can have a degree all day and still not be able to get the job. And I'm a product of that. I came out of Howard University, top tier institution, but I came out in 2007. We were in the midst of an economic recession. There were no jobs, but I did what everything everybody told me to do. So I'm also taking that experience and applying that to what I'm seeing here at Hope Chicago. This is not about you doing everything that we tell you to do. This is about understanding who you are, the things that you need to help you get there, and us building a pathway for you to understand how to navigate to get off of these campuses once you start. Absolutely. So I'll stop there because obviously
no, all good. And you know, food is one of my love languages, so that analogy completely resonates with me. But Maurice, let me turn it to you. You know, how do you think that four-year institutions need to continue to evolve as we're thinking about some of these gaps between what's being promised and how folks are coming out and what's accessible to them?
I think there are sort of, I'll say it's two sides to that coin. I think first, there is a responsibility more in public or private education, and colleges and universities, community colleges. Everybody's job is to make sure that young people get exposure before they leave the institution or the system or the school, meaning apprenticeships, internships, experiences that allow you to understand what the job really is and what are those transferable skills that are not only for the job that you at that time are interested in, but also play a very vital role within the other institutions. Dr. Phillips said earlier, talking about, those essential and transferable skills, those are necessary. And to Michelle's point, like, what do they look like in action? Like, how do I take what I'm learning in English or what I'm learning in algebra, what I'm learning in my entry-level courses in college to really, really see how it plays out in the real world so I can make the best decision in either pivot early or pursue what I've been pursuing, but not graduating from an institution and then saying, I don't know what I want to do. And I feel like that is not only placed on the shoulders of that person, but that is the responsibility of all people involved. So really, really giving young people access and exposure. It can start with field trips in middle school to experiences in high school to more field experiences in college and beyond.
So what I'm hearing is that we need to understand and figure out what career prep really looks like. What does exposure to these pathways and the professions really look like? What experiences are needed? And so on the employer side of that theory, our colleagues at Opportunity at Work launched their national Tear the Paper Ceiling campaign. So last year, this is when they launched it last year, in which it states that often unnecessary college degree requirements on job descriptions are removing, in essence, 60% of Black and Brown Americans from workforce opportunities, right? And so if in fact you're even talking about the experience that they need once they're in college, for folks who don't even have the college experience, this is a big barrier, right? So Cara Collective, one of the things that we're doing is tackling this with employers by helping them reevaluate their inclusive hiring strategies through the work of our expansion arm, Cara Plus, and with job seekers by increasing our focus to opening more career pathways through opportunities of upskilling and credentialing, which I think Eddie mentioned earlier. So let's talk a little bit about each of you and your organizations, how you're continuing to shift this perspective on skills versus degrees. Maurice, maybe just because you were talking about this, maybe you want to start and just sort of finish that thought, add to that thought there.
Yeah, so at Chicago Beyond, we really spend time finding and investing in overlooked proximate leaders who are building what we call alternative models to respond to the needs of those communities. And I think, there are a lot of people who have been locked out of traditional systems and opportunities to earn degrees, to earn credentials. And we know that there are many people in communities across Chicago and across the nation who say, we can take up this work. And people are sort of building in the groundswell of like, we can help you to become whoever you want to become with the skills that you need. And so I think it's important for philanthropy and other folks who have access to capital and resources to invest in not only programs that are built by overlooked leaders, but programs that are effective in college and universities, and programs that are supporting young people and their families getting access. And I think the three of us being represented here sort of show the varying possibilities of what can happen when we put the right resources in the hands of the right people to do the right things.
That's absolutely right. Michelle, I'm going to pivot to you.
I think that, one of the things that's been important for us is really helping students see some things before, like Dr. Sweeney said, in high school. And so we've had some exposure opportunities, but we really are not giving them one option. We're helping kind of them see, we'll take you to McDonald's corporate, right? And some of you might want to own a McDonald's, but some of you might want to run the McDonald's corporation, and let us help you understand what those steps require. We also have, partnership with Accenture, and they talk about, apprenticeships and different components. Hearing the student asks, what Social Security is outside of what their Social Security number is in an environment like that, sitting in Accenture, I think is really important. And so really leveling the playing field for them, having the opportunity to ask these types of questions prior to even being exposed to college, in a sense. And so one of the things that was really incredible for me when we did take students to McDonald's was they saw like the gym in McDonald's, like in the corporate, like they saw all those cool things. But we were also able to say to them, right, like they got a gym here because they probably spend a lot of time here. Right. Like, so really helping students understand this isn't just about, getting a degree or just about, getting a job. This is really about being able to define what success looks like for you and your family, and understanding what those skills and steps are to get there. The last thing that I'll say here is I remember wanting to, work at an animal clinic for a while. And it wasn't until like my dad said, like, listen, go volunteer. And then that's how we'll figure that out. And it was at the animal clinic that I realized, like, this is not really what I want to do. But that had nothing to do with my degree plan. That had nothing to do. It was all about me liking animals and wanting to be around them. Right. And then putting me in that environment helped me see some of the other things that were crucial to being in that role. And so, again, taking that experience, my own personal experience, which I love about Hope, right? It's research-based. We're doing real things, but I can also say, like, I remember what this felt like for me as a CPS student, and I want to be able to give that same exposure because my high school looked a little different than some of the high schools that we're serving. And so I want to make sure that, again, we're giving students a fair shot at just the thought process of where they can go and what they can do.
That's right. That's right. And when I think about the untapped talent that we work with here in Chicago and beyond, there are two populations that we're essentially talking about in this conversation that might require a unique approach. Those who are coming out of high school, who are interested in post-secondary education, but are still facing barriers and challenges to accessibility, and those who have already been left out, which, Maurice, you alluded to, right? They've already been left out of the system, but they're looking for a pathway back in, not just to higher ed, but opportunities that lead to higher earning employment. So, Eddie, you touched on this a little bit, but I kind of want to come back to you here. I know that National Louis is doing so much work around growing its efforts, around creating access for all. So how do we talk about building the on-ramps that serve both of these groups?
That's a great question, Kathleen. And I think it kind of gets back to this idea of multiple entry and exit points and really giving students great exposure and great optionality to really help them find the right academic pathway that gets them to the best career that they're trying to get to. The two barriers, hands down, for most students, especially the students we're talking about, is time and money. Students, and with the rising cost of tuition, I mean, I think we're talking about like the ROI, right? Like a 4-year degree. Universities continue, to be impacted by inflation. Tuition rates continue to rise, and the consequences, it makes it, more difficult for students like the ones we're talking about to access higher education. So one of the things that we've done in National Lewis is when we launched our undergraduate college 8 years ago, we wanted to make sure that tuition was not a barrier for students to access college. And so we actually have one of the lowest tuitions of any university in the state of Illinois. And we've structured tuition in such a way that for students with the highest need financially, with the least amount of resources, that they can cover the cost of their education, tapping into Pell grants and MAP state grants without, taking out any student loan debt. We've maintained that promise, using Michelle's word, for 8 years now since we've launched this program. And as a result, we've seen a really positive shift in, the demography of students that are coming to our campus. We are 70% first generation serving in our undergraduate college. About 70% of our students are Pell Grant recipients. And that was simply because we removed this barrier through cost and tuition that was often, an impediment for students to access college. The second issue that we've seen is time, right? So we launched the program 8 years ago, and we started seeing, that we weren't seeing the best persistence rates, the best graduation rates. And what we quickly learned is that on average, students who are in our undergraduate program, they're working, their parents, they have all these competing responsibilities, and the students who are working on average work 31 hours a week, and they're going to school full time. So it's like students are choosing between work or school survival or, future goal, and they're kind of deferring the future goal for more immediate, obligations, which I think we would all understand and probably make those same choices if faced with them. So what we've done now, about 3 years ago, we launched the program called Accelerate U. We have 4 short-term credentials in Accelerate U, and these are credential workforce development training programs that are no longer the 6 months, that help students get into a great career, get economically stabilized, and all of the credits that they take through this 6-month training program can stack right into one of our bachelor's program if students choose to come back and go for that bachelor's degree. So again, thinking about that multiple kind of entry exit point strategy to help students, again, deal with the issues of, finances, deal with the issues of time, because time is a luxury. And, for under-resourced students, it's a luxury that many students don't simply have. And so we're trying to solve for both of those problems. And we're constantly iterating on how do we, again, kind of embed the wraparound support services to make sure students, as they navigate the academic journey with National Lewis, that we have everything that they need. They have everything from us that we can provide to make sure that we're removing all of those barriers and all of the obstacles that get in the way. So time and speed to degree, and again, removing financial barriers, I think, are 2 of the probably biggest levers that any institution of higher education can do for their students to help them achieve their goals.
It's really incredible to hear you talk about this, because I think each one of you has talked about not even just the direct work that you do, but all of the additional supports and resources that are needed to help address the barriers, the myriad barriers that many of the populations that we're working with are facing. And some of those we do, right? And some of those you all do, but we know that we can't do this work in isolation. We ourselves at Cara Collective, we're so proud to partner, collaborate with other organizations and institutions to figure out how to advance these opportunities. Some of you are collaborating even with each other. I'm thinking specifically about our partnership with Aon, for example, with their apprenticeship program, where workforce candidates receive practical on-the-job experience in different positions while simultaneously earning college credits with City Colleges of Chicago. And we're also working with groups like OAI, who are training and upskilling job seekers to prepare them for meaningful careers in the trades. So what I'd love to, ask the panel is, what partnerships are you particularly proud of? How are you utilizing those to create access and opportunity? Michelle, let's start with you.
For sure, partnership is the only way that we can exist. We were so big on partnership that I remember when we were getting ready to launch in 2022, we were going around having kind of these mini meetings to let folks know that we were going to launch, because, in Chicago, it's really important. There's such a huge ecosystem of post-secondary access and organizations that are really working to build this, and that have been working for decades and generations, really. So it was important for us to be both clear about what our intentions were, but respectful of the work that has already been happening. So one of our greatest partners is Chicago Public Schools. We could not do this work without having true partnership with Chicago Public Schools. We also have 29 institutional partners. And again, I don't say that in a way, you know, to brag. I say that in a way to show that it is an assurance that, you know, all of the public schools in this state are on board with us. Some of the private institutions have begun. National Louis was one of the first ones, but we have a couple of more private institutions that are with us now. And I think that that's incredibly critical to recognizing where the state has to go and where the city has to go with the work that we're doing around exposure and access. But quite frankly, the transfer framework that we're trying to create in Hope Chicago is one that I think our partners have wanted for so long. You know, there's a million articulation agreements with Chicago, with the city colleges of Chicago, but it's really about the marketing and the messaging. How different is it now to tell a student, listen, city colleges is a great place to get started. And there are a lot of different credentials and things that you can tap into. Same thing with National Louis. And I was trying to hold my seat when Eddie was talking about, and then seeing if a student would want to go into a 4-year track after that. We're almost preaching that on the front end. Here are several different ways that you can approach this, right? Absolutely. And getting a 4-year degree is absolutely a great opportunity, but there are different pathways to get that. And let us help you figure out what's going to be best for you. We also offer our students, you know, a semester of deferral, right? Things happen, you know, and I'm going to be all the way real here. Getting pregnant in college can throw off an entire situation, right? But a boyfriend and a girlfriend getting pregnant in college and you're both Hope Scholars, we have to make some adjustments, but you can still go to school, right? We can still usher you through this process. And so I think that it's really important for us and our partnerships, and what our partnerships help us do is to help families and students recognize that things are going to come up. You're going to have issues. You're going to make mistakes. This is the way of the world. Our job and our responsibility is to help you navigate those mistakes, navigate your next steps, to help ultimately usher you to and through success. But that requires being open and honest that mistakes are going to come up. That requires being open and honest that when you have to pivot, in many instances you will have to pivot, whether that's because of life circumstances or you didn't do well in a course, or this is actually not what you want to do, right? You get to pivot. And so I think that our partnerships have put us in a position where we can really have a unique lens on helping both an individual, helping a family, and then kind of helping a collective mass of folks. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Absolutely. And that ecosystem is so critical. Maurice, how do you think about partnerships? Who are you proud to partner with? And how do you think about that in your work?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, we really center people on the margins. I remember a former student who said, Mr. Sweeney, I could not complete my application when I saw they asked if I was convicted or something similar to that. And he said he didn't, you know, and I'm not sure if the colleges or university or wherever he was applying would have rejected him. But for him, that was a barrier. And he said, I could not proceed any, you know, I didn't see a path forward. And so when we think about the work at Chicago Beyond, we know that there are a lot of proximate overlooked leaders who are building alternative models to really provide more upskill opportunities for people who do not see the traditional or the, you know, the newly revamped pathways to actually get to those opportunities. And so that's what we do at Chicago Beyond as an impact investor. We put the money behind the people, and then we also provide the growth support for those people through other organizations. So like we have a partnership with an organization that's called Resilia. And a part of what Resilia does is provide the coaching, the strategic planning, and all the things to help take these innovations to the next level, because we know that there are a lot of people who are responding to the needs of the varying people within their communities. And we also have really spent a lot of time with partnering with jails and prisons to disrupt isolation in prisons, to provide pathways for folks who are going to be coming out of prisons and incarcerated situations with opportunities. So there's a lot of excitement because we know, we believe, just like everyone else, right? We're not throwing people away. We're not casting them to the side. We see them as being viable, loving, supporting, people who actually want those opportunities, and we're figuring out what's our sliver in the world in order to do that.
Amazing. Thank you. And Eddie?
Yeah, so I think Michelle used a really important word, ecosystem. I think, you know, the ecosystem in Chicago and around Chicago is really rich with incredible organizations doing mission-driven work, impacting communities. And I always think about, you know, the collective impact we can have when we link together and work together smartly. And so as we've been thinking about our partnership framework, we kind of have 4 domains of, you know, partnership engagement opportunities that we think about. We always think about kind of the community engagement piece. You know, we have, again, so many community-based organizations that are entrenched in communities, doing the on-the-ground work, the hard work. And, you know, it helps kind of fill a void that we, frankly, as an academic institution, don't always kind of have a read or a post on trying to address and touch. And so strong community partnerships is critical. We also, you know, partner with our philanthropic community. You know, again, things cost money. And so, like, how do we resource these things to build economies of scale that we can sustain and continue to support students in the ways they need to be supported? So lots of work, you know, around philanthropy. And then other academic institutions and partners, you know, like CPS and other school districts we work with, community college partners, again, to make sure that the academic experience is a cohesive experience from K-12 to post-secondary education, and the students are getting what they need every step of the way. So really structuring those tight partnerships with all of our academic partners is important. And then the industry workforce, right? So at the end of this journey, making sure that we're anchored up and linked up with really great employer partners who are, you know, willing and ready and able to receive learners when they earn whatever that credential is. If it's a certificate credential, or if it's a 4-year degree or a 2-year degree, then we're talking to employer partners to hear what their needs are and how we can properly prepare students to meet those business needs. So we kind of engaged, you know, with a variety of partners across those 4 kind of streams of work. Again, proud Hope Chicago partner. Just one quick anecdote. We also work with All Chicago, and they have been an incredible partner in really helping us address some of the emergency funding needs that many of our students have faced when they are in financial crisis. And just one quick data point, students who've benefited from those funds, we've seen those students persist at a 10% clip higher rate than students who are without those resources. So we know when you partner with organizations that have a specialty or they have a focus, you know, that we can build capacity, we can fill gaps, and we can really collectively address the needs of our learners.
Absolutely. And talking about this collective impact is exactly why we're here today, right? And so I'd love to start landing this conversation a little bit before we turn it over to the audience for questions. But with a final question for you all, you know, Conversations with Cara is not just a cute name, and it sounds fun to say, right? But it really is a call to action, right? This is why we are here. And so as you think about the intersection between education and workforce development, what do you hope that the audience watching this is going to take away from today to create in terms of better outcomes, particularly for our Black and Brown communities? Michelle, let's start with you.
Sure. I think one of the takeaways is that, you know, Chicago is a world-class city. And I believe that, you know, when we really talk about collaboration and even just this conversation in and of itself, in each kind of entity that's represented here, we want Chicago to be a shining example of these issues being fixed. If we can fix this here in Chicago, I truly believe that, you know, we can be a model for our country. And so Hope Chicago, you know, we came out of the blue, but the real, no pun intended, but the real goal here is to be an example and to say, like, hey, with the right set of funding, with the right set of folks behind us, this is a model that can be not only done and really mastered here in this city, but we can really show the country that there's a better way for us to approach what's necessary to really address the students and families of our country who are the minority now, ... Who we serve right now in Hope Chicago, it is 50% African-American, 50% Latinx. So we're very sure and very clear for the 5 high schools that we're currently serving. That's just 5 high schools in Chicago public schools. That's about 4,000 students across those 5 high schools for the promise that we gave them, you know, around taking 4 classes and being able to give them this promise of having access to both higher education and workforce. So what I really want people to take away from this is that this is working. And it hasn't been long, but with the right set of partners and the right set of boldness, honestly, we can really resolve what we know are real issues that are happening right here in the city, but also happening in mass across this country. And so we are hoping to be an example. And I do believe that not only can we do this together, we're doing it, and we have to have a more amplification of the things that are actually working.
Awesome. Dr. Phillips, what are some takeaways or calls to action that you want to invoke for the audience?
Yeah, so just 3 quick thoughts. One is, I'll finish how I started. Again, there's lots of anti-DEI legislative activity happening around this country. I think we're fortunate in the state of Illinois where we haven't seen a lot of that activity kind of creep in our political discussions and systems. But I think we have to pay attention, to what's happening nationally and the impact that work, will have on our ability to really create accessible opportunities for the population of learners we're talking about. So that's just number one. I think there's a lot of, really concerning activity going on the political front. 2 is, again, just kind of reinforcing, this importance of partnerships. I mean, we have so many great organizations throughout Chicago, and sometimes you can be a bit disjointed, a bit disconnected. So I think it's, how can we work smarter together? How can we collaborate? How can we lean into each of our areas of expertise, again, to fill gaps, to build capacity, and have that collective impact that we're talking about? And 3rd, I would say, higher education and workforce development to me is a public good. It's also an economic good. So whatever your motivation is, if you're morally motivated, if you're financially motivated, the net, narrative there is that it benefits communities, it benefits the city when we invest in underinvested communities and we support underserved populations. Rising tide floats all boats. And so I think it's also about really understanding, this notion that, this is not an issue of entitlement. It's not an issue of privilege. This is an issue of equity. And when we equitably serve people, we uplift our communities, we uplift our city. And so I think those are my 3 kind of talking takeaway points.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Swinney, take us home.
So you want me to follow those 2, right? What I'll add to that, because this is an issue of equity. It is an issue of economic mobility. It is about having the right partners in place. And a part of me aspirationally is where does anyone in the city go to just know where the opportunities live? And I think that's sort of just sitting in my head on the side. I also, leaving public education was a tough decision that I made a few years ago. I call it my intermission. At some point, I do see myself doing, further down the line, some other things in public education. But what I discovered that I thought I knew as a principal was all of the ways these alternative models were standing up, not only in Chicago, but across the country, with people who said, the traditional systems aren't working for me, or they didn't work at the time I needed them to work. And so they start to build new things. And I think it is so important to understand what we call them alternative models or other ways of helping people to do the upscaling so that they can have access and opportunity. I remember my father wanting to do things as he, aged and wanting to have more opportunities. And I'm glad at Hope Chicago, they're doing something very unique with thinking about generational opportunities. But I recognize he was looking for more job training programs and more things. And I think we have to also always remember young people are at the centerpiece of a lot of our work, but we also have to think about those people who were once coal miners whose jobs are shutting down, who are saying, hey, I need opportunities as well, and really think about what does it mean to sort of continue to revamp ways of providing people with the opportunities so that they can shift and transfer and do all the things to create the jobs they want or enter into this I'm gonna call this alternative universe of a workforce that we have right now. So, but I think the opportunities are there. And I think that the more we each know what each other person is doing, we can see what this real groundswell of an ecosystem looks like and use it to really further and drive more opportunities for people.
Thank you so much. So I just want to take a moment to do some snaps. And I know the virtual audience is just snapping here to thank each of you on our panel, Michelle Howard, Dr. Eddie Phillips, and Dr. Maurice Swinney, for your time, but more importantly, the efforts that each of you is driving to help untapped talent become more economically empowered through education and employment. So what I want to do now is open it up to the audience for questions. So we have a question from May. She asks, the affirmative action ruling has been a hot topic with employers lately. Any thoughts on how to navigate this in your partnerships? Eddie, maybe I'll start with you, just given that it's a very direct tie to higher ed, but then we could open it up to others as well.
I'll share a story. So we have a medical assistant program that we launched a few years ago. It's part of that Accelerate U model that I mentioned. And the population of students we work with in that program are mostly first generation adult learners with families, and don't necessarily come to the program with a ton of confidence, but they have all types of ability and all types of skills and assets and strengths. So we had our first cohort go through the program, graduated, students were placed at different healthcare medical centers, and one employer partner came back to us and complained that the student wasn't adequately prepared. The student, was making mistakes and, just really creating some issues, in their unit. And so we followed up with the student. And what we learned from the student was that they were just simply intimidated. Like there was a cultural kind of disconnect with how this student, showed up, presented themselves, related, spoke, articulated, advocated for themselves, and did really feel like the sense of agency. And I think there is around this cultural sensitivity piece, and all of the DEI work that's happening, as students are moving from college to careers, I think employer partners can really take a step back and work with us to make sure that students, their voices are heard, they're recognized, and then we're creating safe spaces for students to enact agency, advocate for themselves. Because what we later learned with this particular student was that actually she is highly competent. She just didn't have the confidence to speak up for herself and advocate for herself. And so I think employer partners around some of the kind of DEI work, we could really work better together to help students, again, getting back to those durable skills, develop those durable skills, communications, growth mindset, fortitude, really reinforcing those life skills that I think will also make them incredible employees for their organizations.
Absolutely. And a related question, not to put you in the hot seat, Dr. Phillips, but a related question from Origami Works. So, you referenced some of the creative ways to kind of work around the affirmative action ruling. What are some of those creative ways that you're thinking about working around some of those rulings?
So it's interesting. We haven't been directly impacted because we aren't one of the super elite institutions, but the 200 or so elite institutions have been mostly impacted by the affirmative action ruling. And some of the things that I've heard, for example, where you can't necessarily ask specific questions about one's race or racial and ethnic background, institutions are now asking students to kind of speak to their lived experience as a proxy, to really understand what some of the challenges are, what some of the inequities are that these individuals, these students have experienced, and how the institution can kind of fill the gap and meet students where they are. So, that's just one example of how I've heard of institutions really thinking creatively outside of the race-based kind of conscious admission process by using student stories, student narratives as a way to kind of tease out what students have gone through and what students are looking for, as they make that transition to higher education.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yes, please, Michelle.
One thing I did want to say is around the topic with employers and the affirmative action ruling. So obviously, we have internship programs here at Hope Chicago. And so one of the things that we've tried to do, because we get to be kind of the middle ground and the middleman, is really help our companies and corporations that we're working with for those internships. We kind of walk them through some cultural competencies, right? So we learned something very similar. We had a young lady who was at an internship, and it turns out that, Eddie, to your same point, she was very competent, but on her breaks or whenever she was done with her work, this was I think this was a finance internship. She was just kind of reading her books because she enjoyed to read, right? But it was also because she wasn't given enough instruction to help her understand what was supposed to happen when her work was done, right? And so really having more of more intimate conversations with the employers and the corporations that we get to work with to say to them, these are some of the cultural competencies that you need to understand, not just about our students, but about people in general. So really working the partnership of being a partner with Hope Chicago in a way that helps them both kind of build their acumen on how they serve and support our scholars, and at the same time helping our scholars recognize, listen, you're not just going here to get a job. You're going here to help change the flavor of what they understand about, you know, young people, you know, or, you know, kind of the workforce and what you expect from them now. So it's a very unique relationship, but I think it's crucial to know that we hold responsibility in being able to help usher corporations through this process.
Absolutely. And I think some of what you're talking about is some of these soft, but what some people call harder skills, right? You know, we have a question from Claire where we talk a lot about building these soft, again, what we often call is harder or more durable skills. What do you all think are the top skills, you know, durable, hard, soft, or otherwise, however you describe them, that young people need to thrive in the workplace?
So I'll give a quick plug to, if you haven't, and I'll share this link somehow, we'll get it out, but CompTIA and Succeed America recently published a really great framework on durable skills. And there's a wheel that kind of talks about what those core durable skills are. And they reference a really interesting data point of all job ads that are on LinkedIn or Indeed or, you know, these job boards. 7 out of 10 job advertisements ask for some version or variation of durable skills in their job ads. And they talk about 10, you know, top durable skills that are showing up commonly in job ads. So I'm going to glance away for a moment to read these to you all, but I'll share the document somehow. But communication is important. Leadership, you know, being able to direct and deliver results. Metacognition, you know, some level of critical thinking, collaboration, character, creativity, growth mindset, mindfulness, and fortitude. You can argue that those are life skills too, right? And so like when you're developing students to kind of embrace and understand those skills and, you know, internalize them in ways that make sense for them, not only are you developing a great employee, but you're developing a great person.
Right.
So CompTIA, Succeed America, they have a really great framework on durable skills.
And it reminds me of like the thought around time management. You know, sometimes you can clock into a job, do a thing, and go home. But when you think about the types of jobs that are out there now, there are multiple things that one must do in order to deliver a solid product or have a great outcome. And so time management is not just about being on time, showing up, doing work, and going home. It is about how do I prioritize what's important in this moment in order to get to the end result of something. And so that, I think, sometimes is an unlock when we think about time and some of those soft skills that they're actually needed if you want to have a viable opportunity in the workforce.
Great. Thank you. And maybe one last question before we wrap up. So, you know, many institutions and organizations are developing their own partnerships. Is there a way or place that folks who are interested can actually coordinate or collaborate to build even broader collective partnerships? How are you all finding this in terms of collective partnerships that you are able to be a part of and or build?
There's so many layers to that one.
Yes.
I'm going to use a birth center one that's sort of not education, but like Chicago Beyond is investing in birth justice, Black maternal health. And what we're finding is that there are a lot of collaboratives where a lot of birth centers that are currently in operation or birth centers that are being stood up are all sort of coming together around a common good, saying, this is what we need here. This is what we have to share. And so that people are figuring out how to sort of take a central idea and build a coalition behind it. I think that's an opportunity to figure out, how do I, as a person who's doing a particular thing, partner and be in collaboration with others to sort of build that community and that partnership to sort of strengthen that area. That's the one example that comes up for me.
Yeah, another example that comes up for me too is I think about the work that we do with the CBOC, which stands for the Chicago, the Community-Based Organization Collective. And that is a collaboration of about 16 workforce development organizations that have gotten together to say, we're probably better together than we are separate. And how can we leverage the work that we're each doing to impact the people that we are serving, right? So that we're able to, if we don't have that employment partnership, be able to work with another organization who does to place folks. So, you know, and bringing together people in panels and conversations and in different forums to help lift up those. So Again, I want to just thank every single one of our panelists, unless there's anybody else who has a dying. Okay, great. Each one of our panelists for your incredible contributions to today's topic. So, but before we wrap up, I want to just make sure that each panelist has a chance to kind of shout out how the audience can learn about you and your organization and the work that you're doing. We're going to make sure that we include it in the chat. But Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Certainly, hopechicago.org. We encourage you to visit our website. We have our annual reports listed there, and just a lot of good information about what we're looking to do and how we're working with, corporations and companies. And so I just encourage collaboration and reaching out, because there's a lot of work to be done, and we're happy to do this in partnership.
Wonderful. Dr. Eddie Phillips.
Yes, again, just want to say thank you, Kathleen and Cara Collective, for this panel, and my esteemed fellow panel members. This has been a great panel. More about National Louis University, www.nl.edu. So nl.edu. You can learn all about our programs and partnership opportunities. We are eager to support and serve students, but we're also eager to partner with any of your organizations to really transform lives of students. So again, great. And thanks so much for having us today, Kathleen.
Awesome. Thank you. And Dr. Marie Swinning.
These are my people. So thank you all for Cara, Kathleen, for bringing us together, and so great to be in conversation with you. ChicagoBeyond.org is where you find out not only about Chicago Beyond, but also about our partners. So if you're curious to know where has Chicago Beyond put its resources, you can check them out on at ChicagoBeyond.org, and also find opportunities to partner with those organizations as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you all. So if any of you watching are feeling inspired by what you just heard and are interested in learning about how Cara Collective is fueling a courageous national movement to eradicate poverty, I encourage you to follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel where you'll get another recording of this, and learn more about how you can engage with our mission at caracollective.org. As I mentioned, Conversations with Cara is our annual series of discussions that's centered around our work and the issues that we face here in Chicago and beyond. Make sure you're invited to the next one by subscribing to our newsletter at the link in the chat. One last thank you to our panel and to everyone who tuned in today. Thank you so much, and let's make it a great day.